for a couple of years, but I sort of finished my career in biology and chemistry, so I was a little bit more interested in life sciences. But in my career path, I've had to do a lot more sort of real ad hoc. And as we all know, engineers are pretty much taking over the world because it's all about creative problem solving. And so what I'll share today is kind of a bit more about my.
We're gonna do a tour of your place too after.
Yeah.
So I know how many people are thinking about doing that. I don't know if we have anyone raise your hand if you're gonna go on that. So far, we might not do it.
No problem. Yeah. Dr. Beaucage has always been interested and invited.
Maybe I could just do it anyway.
To come and see our skunk works as we refer to it, where we build our stuff. And we have a pretty interesting little spot where we basically prototype and R&D and test a wide variety of appliances. I'll show you a fair amount of what we do. But most of our actual manufacturing is taking place in China, where everything is made. I think God was made in China. Basically, they're a voracious culture of manufacturing and vocational skills, technical hard skills, the ability to run a CNC machine. And since we build a lot of consumer-oriented products at a high volume, 1,000 units at a time, it pretty much from the beginning of the business made sense to manufacture over there. But what we do here is always make the first several iterations and make sure everything works and all of that. You can see this pitch deck is a little outdated. She's carrying one of our original solar ovens. That was the first product that we launched on Kickstarter. Are you guys familiar with crowdfunding, Kickstarter and Indiegogo? That's how my business got started. I basically had an idea I had a couple prototypes that worked really well, and about 1,000 emails from people that I had known in the industry of being a solar installer and integrator. And I took this idea that was kind of a muse or a pup project that had been going on for about 7 years, and I put it up on built a commercial for it with my iPhone, threw it up on Kickstarter with those 1,000 emails. And on the first day, I was working for all kinds of other solar companies at the time, doing design and installation work and helping electrical contractors and roofers get into the space. They all knew that I was working on this little project. And of course, they were getting all the marketing and materials and such. And the first day, the product did $13,000 on Kickstarter, and by the end of 7 weeks, it did 200 grand. I had thought that I didn't really know how well it was going to do, so I had a threshold set for $40,000. If it doesn't get over that, I'll pack this thing up and stop talking about it. So I was pretty excited about it, obviously. And so when it did so well, it sort of realigned my entire career and like turned me into kind of a products inventor and an entrepreneur. And over the last 10 years, we've launched about 25 unique SKUs. Our warehouse here in Cincinnati has about 58 unique products in it, 15,000 square feet. We're doing about $6 million in revenue every year now. So the business grew like crazy just because basically there's needs. We know there's a million needs, and especially when you add the climate change and all the tumultuous energies around the world, there's a huge need for solving real problems in real life. We know that software and AI is going to be a big part of all of that, but I'm kind of a little bit more old school in that I like to see what I'm working on. I like to touch what I'm doing, and I see a huge gap in the outdoor recreation space, like where you see like Coleman or Yeti, brands that are from the 20th century, not really evolving well enough to adapt the latest and greatest technologies and really solve things in a more efficient, more optimized manner. Outdoor recreation is, like I said, our first and foremost. This is, again, camping, beaching, barbecue, backyard events, festivals, tailgates. And that space really popped during COVID. We weren't allowed to do anything but stay outside. So we saw a huge tailwind from this. And then our other kind of main markets are in disaster relief, which we kind of value engineer our products, try to make them a little bit lower cost and more rugged. And then the sort of backup power. This is a kind of a new industry that's growing like crazy and ties us into like resilience. And we like to design and build everything for those two main purposes, recreation and resilience. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1. I know I'm not trying to pitch you guys, so by all means stop me when and where. But you know, we're looking at some really interesting and large industries. You know, we know the power of cooling and how major that is in the world and how much that's growing. It's really increasing our greenhouse gas emissions. The heat pump is a bit of a energy hack. It's a bit of a phenomena, and they only get more and more efficient every year. But no one's really cracked the nut of solar cooling. I mean, it's a perfect fit where generally when you have the biggest need for cooling, you also have the most amount of sunlight available. They pretty well match each other. And that's also when the utility grid is getting hit with its peak load. So there's a lot of things that solar can do that were relatively untapped. In the 70s, Jimmy Carter started the modern solar energy industry. He was someone that was actually fairly in tune with engineering and energy. And he incentivized the solar energy industry, which basically hatched an industry overnight. And he's considered kind of the godfather of modern solar energy. But back then, everything was solar thermal. It was all making heat with the sun using like the greenhouse effect, usually running like a liquid through a series of copper pipes. Then, you know, taking the heated water and putting it back into a domestic water tank or some kind of a heat transfer system so that you could heat a space or heat water. Those applications are great, but we don't always need heat. And one of the problems with solar thermal is you can't really turn it off. It's basically a boiler on your rooftop, and you don't have the ability to just stop the flow. Because when the liquid stagnates, it can boil, or in the case of like an antifreeze, when it stagnates, it'll go acidic, and then it'll start eating up the pipes that it's in. So a lot of the systems that were installed because of these great incentives on a federal level were then defunct just a couple of years later. The first freeze that would hit, you know, Tennessee, and all of the solar thermal systems would pop, or you know, when a pump would fail or a control system would fail, nobody knew how to fix it, you know, because all these fly-by-night solar installers grew up and sunburned everybody. And the incentives were so good that everyone was getting paid, but the end consumer got the raw deal because they couldn't keep their system running for decades like they were designed. Some of those systems are still working. I've fixed a number of solar systems that were installed in the 70s and 80s. But again, those are mostly all thermal. Fast forward to today, and almost all solar energy that we speak of is photovoltaic. You guys know what photovoltaic is or means? You know, you got a picture in your mind, probably like a solar cell. And basically that's the ability to create electricity from the sun. And if you know anything about engineering, you know electricity is kind of here to stay. It's kind of the benchmark. It's the direction that a lot of things are headed. We know our roadways are moving towards electricity. It's just easier to dispatch. You can move high volumes of energy quickly. There's already a heck of an infrastructure everywhere, and it's so much easier to control. So solar in its modern form is almost all solar electric, and in solar thermal, which is actually sometimes 3 times more efficient, is kind of a dying breed because it requires a lot more engineering and a lot more hands-on capabilities. So then maybe there's a niche there. So yeah, we looked at shelter. We built a prototype for a tiny house. We're doing campers, inflatable boats, and we're working on some van conversions. I'm just kind of spitballing all these various things that this particular presentation is taking me through, just so you guys have a better sense of what I do and kind of where your path may blend. Essentially, like I'm only here for you to sort of.
Still doing, you're doing like there's a kind of like a Kickstarter thing going on now for you or something. I just Googled, like I was looking for your address, you know. I get to this thing, it was like $2 million or $3 million or something.
Oh yeah,
like stock, buy stock.
Yeah. So in addition to regular crowdfunding, which is where you're buying a product, so you came up with this solar oven, put it up on Kickstarter and say, hey, here's a prototype. It works really well. If you buy it today, I'll give you 40% off. I might not ship it for three months, maybe 8 months, maybe 2 years, but I'll ship it and you bought it super cheap. That's traditional crowdfunding. And then there's also equity crowdfunding, which is another regulation that was opened up back in the Obama era. I think it was like 2015 or 2013. And this enables non-accredited investors. So that's people like you and I, unless maybe I don't know you and you're a billionaire or a multi-millionaire, to invest in companies. And in the past, like the only people that could really invest in a private exchange in a company were well-educated, well-endowed multimillionaires. Now, in order to kind of help democratize the economy and make it
like venture capital.
Yeah, it's almost like each of us can be venture capitalists.
But is a venture capitalist, is that a person has to be accredited or something?
Generally, yeah.
How do you get it from the government? Yeah.
Yeah, to be an accredited.
Some, but I didn't know. I never asked them for their credentials or anything.
Yeah, and I'm not that super close to knowing all of this stuff, but private equity and venture capital are basically super wealthy people, wealthy funds, wealthy families, money manager types that can go around and try to pick winners. And generally, if this is done with like startup businesses, they'll pick like 10 businesses and one of which needs to 10x or scale and get really, really valuable or go public. And the other 9 might not. So they're obviously gambling heavily. Investment is in general. And they're picking to their best ability. They're picking 10 companies, wrapping them up in a fund. Say there's like a $10 million fund, and each company got $1 million. And then, 3 to 5 years later, at least one of those companies better be worth 40 million or 300 million and going public, like a Facebook or something, or that fund manager's in trouble. And then the rich people.
But in the meantime, he makes money, so he doesn't really care. I mean, he gets out of venture capital, but he goes and sells cars and stuff.
Right. Yeah. It's funny.
It's a lifestyle.
Salespeople are generally some of the most valuable people in an organization. And there's such a stigma around engineers that because they don't have sales skills. Or they don't have marketing skills.
Picking stocks, I can tell you that from personal.
Or they're bad at picking stocks. But then you look at these anomalies.
Like, that company is definitely going to be a winner because there's obviously a market for it. And that isn't how it works at all, right? Not at all. It's just like whatever people think is
hype is real and marketing.
It's a nice color. That's the thing.
And, I know that we all talk about him too much, but Elon Musk is a goddamn poster child of all this crap. He is so good at the marketing side of it. He's a freaking sales genius. He can spin something in a way that you're like, I want that. And then, he crowdfund, like the Cybertruck was a crowdfunded thing, essentially, that he launched 6 years ago. And I think there's 6 of them on the road now. The solar rooftop was like 8 or 10 years ago. And I don't know if any of those are installed.
Battery wall things.
Yeah, I mean, and they've delivered like crazy, so don't get me wrong. But the power of spin or hype or capturing someone's dream and saying, look, I can solve your problems, and people go, yeah, I'm on board. That's an age-old reality or skill. And it's important. It's important to know some of that stuff in the realm of business. You will ultimately likely be working for a business And that business is a bit of a beast that has to make money. And so that's the unfortunate reality of the lives that we're involved in. You know, let's hope that what you're doing is something you feel good about, that, you know, that is something that you feel is of service and helping the world. Money for money's sake is usually a pretty sad state of affair. And a number of these sales and financial managers are pretty sad individuals. They're pretty undersatisfied in their lives. So do work that matters, do work that feels real. You know, that may be my only message. And, you know, I also really encourage people to stay hands-on. There's a pretty big gap, it feels like to me, where a lot of younger folks don't, they're shutting me down. Get Patrick out of here. He's talking bullshit.
Alerts, yeah, this guy, yeah. Are you
Yeah.
safety? I think it's just simply.
No, keep paying your tuition. I'm sorry, I didn't say it.
Yeah. I think you did.
Oh, we can acknowledge.
Yeah. I think
You guys feeling safe? Oh, I don't know where we were, but we can get pretty off topic and philosophical. Let's talk more about the technology that we developed and see if we can't get this slideshow to show something real. But I was just saying, like,
well, how many? I don't know. I think I asked before how many people would be thinking about entrepreneurs. So I think only like 3 or 4 on the class. So. Anyway.
Yeah, I didn't really ever think about entrepreneurship either. I just kind of thought about solutions. And then I got sucked into the ride of the entrepreneurship journey of being the leader of a business and all of that. I'm more of an engineer. I'm more of an energy person. I just like to come up with real solution sets. But business is there's a lot of learning to happen in business, and it's very commonsensical, you know, this whole experience. It's powerful how much marketing plays into it. So I wanted to state that, you know, 50% of our battle is a marketing battle, but you know, the engineering, the quality control, supply chain management, you know, all of that is just super, just very, very real. And there's just no way around it. Your product has to work super well. Boy, again, I don't know what's of interest to you guys, you know, what's it all resonating, but feel free to blurt anything out at any point in time. I got tired. One of my lead designers was super fed up with throwaway plastic utensils after every meal. And so he didn't carry a purse, but he carries a wallet. And he's like, shoot, I could develop a set of utensils that fits in my wallet. And not the best picture, but the fork and the spoon slide into a little stainless steel sheath. And that way, like after you've used them and they're dirty, you put them in this little plastic deal and they go into your pocket or into your wallet. We did a Kickstarter for those about 4 years ago and did like, you know, sold like 7,000 sets. Here's a little example of our solar ovens. What's unique about them is they run on an evacuated tube. There's 2 layers of glass. So that's like the inner layer. And then here's an outer layer. And between them is a vacuum. Vacuum meaning nothing at all. And we pull a high vacuum, which is a lot better than you might find like in a stainless steel thermos or whatever, because the seal between these two is actually also made out of glass. The seals are usually what give in a vacuum. And so we get a super duper high vacuum, and that represents nearly it's an R97 when we calculated that out. If you're familiar with R value in the realm of building science, and R, or like a 2x4 wall is usually like R13. And that number is essentially how effective that wall is at preventing heat transfer. So we get this crazy high insulation in a 1/4 inch between 2 layers of borosilicate glass. And then we build this reflector arrangement that triples the amount of sunlight. And that's got a really interesting shape to it that is like what's called a compound parabola. And so the tube sits in the center here, and it's got a dark, the inner layer is dark so that it takes sunlight and absorbs it. And then there's a couple other layers of metal that'll basically transfer that into heat and then trap the heat with an infrared layer of copper on the very inside. So you get this heat to generate and generate. But what's interesting about the shape is that the sunlight can be off angle, like upwards of 50 degrees or so, and still mainly land against that tube. So you don't have to go out and adjust it at all times. As you can tell, the food is then gone in and out via a stainless steel tray that's placed horizontally. And you can see more of our product information at gosun.co. And you can cook a meal in 20 minutes with nothing but sunlight. I should have brought a prototype, but I thought all of you guys were coming down to our skunk works at the end of class here, and you would see where we make these things. But oh well, you'll have to look two-dimensionally here. But you know, you could literally they could heat up with this fluorescent light. They're shockingly efficient because of this R value, and they work on freezing cold days in the winter pretty much just as well as on a hot summer day. And then usually we make the reflectors to where they collapse and protect the tube, and you could take them on the go. And we have various sizes. The one in the picture is one of the larger ones that will feed a family. It takes about an hour to make a meal. And then we added, so like inside there is the stainless steel tray, where all the food goes. And onto the stainless steel tray in the last several years, we added a 12-volt heater, which it's a Kapton encapsulated printed circuit board. And 12-volt is on every car, truck, boat, or RV pretty much ever made. And since we're cooking inside a vacuum insulated chamber, we're using 1/10 the electricity of a traditional microwave or a hot pot or induction cooker. So 1/10 the energy consumption to get the same job done. That's interesting. We're cooking inside a long horizontal vacuum tube. It's hard to convince people to do that. Why? We're creatures of comfort and tradition and culture. A lot of the meals that we're eating are things that were created from grandma's grandma, and we don't even really know it. We're used to cooking over a fire. I mean, that hasn't really changed even when you're cooking on your stove at home. Microwaves are about the only real change from that in the last 100 years, or the last 300,000 years, or however long humans have been using fire to prepare our meals. And by the way, there's a pretty interesting leap in evolution that happened when we started cooking. It's not clear, what came first, but our brains grew like crazy after the advent of controlled fire and cooking. It basically made a lot more nutrition available to us. We launched a solar cooler about 5 years ago, and I'm afraid this presentation is going to be a little old and it doesn't hit everything we've done in all these spaces. But basically, we found the same kind of refrigerant cycle that you have in your fridge at home shrunk down onto a cooler scale, and so you no longer have to buy ice when you're out and about. So your food stays dry and organized, and the ice doesn't pulverize and smash and make everything smell like hot dog juice. We've all been there. And at the price of food, this is my big sales pitch. At the price of food today, you just can't afford to buy ice. Your ice is going to kill your food, and now you can't eat it. We'll go on like a 4-day weekend. I'll take this cooler, it's on wheels. I'll pull it into my fridge, into my house. I'll just grab whatever's in the fridge, chuck it in there, put the heavy stuff on the bottom, and then come back after a 4-day weekend, and the food will go back in the fridge. It doesn't smell. It's not all slippery and oily. And so again, you're saving, and you have full temperature control. You can have the coldest beer in camp. You can freeze. You can actually hold on to stuff, and you can freeze You can hold on to ice cream, you can freeze water, make ice. Really convenient. I haven't bought a bag of ice in about 7 or 8 years, and I don't remember what ice was like. We're clearing. It's all clear. Okay. Good stuff. During the COVID pandemic, we developed a water purification and sanitation system. Sanitation, was a big one during COVID, and I get tired of all that alcohol on my hands. It kind of started to hurt my hands. I always got these little cuts on my hands, and then you put the alcohol on it. And I love washing my hands. I'll wash my hands like 50 times a day. I date a nurse, a practitioner from UC, and she's got me washing my hands 27 times an hour. And I didn't really ever get COVID either. I mean, I tell you what, washing your hands is super duper important. So we developed a sink system that runs on a 2-watt USB powered pump. So the pump uses just almost no energy, and we basically optimized it to spray water at high pressure with the most minimal flow rate that we could possibly develop. So this thing uses 1/10 the flow rate of your faucet at home. It's 1 liter a minute. And no great pictures here of that whole sink system, but you can collapse the sink because it's one of those siliconized things. You can throw it in your backpack, and then you can, basically, like, we'll be having events, we'll have a barbecue or whatever, and we'll just set up a sink in the backyard so that you can wash up. You don't have to go in the house. We've got a van conversion, and we've got this as our water system there. Whenever you're off grid, water is a huge factor and a big pain in the butt. Water is heavy as could be. It's super energy intense when you're filtering it. It's super duper energy intense when you're heating it. Water is like a battery. We all know that whole specific heat thing from chemistry class, physics. Water is a battery, and it just takes tons and tons of calories to warm up or cool down, depending on what you're trying to do. And it takes a lot of work to clean too. We know how lucky we are when we flip that tap. What's inside this box is the pump, the faucet, and all the hoses. There's 20 feet of hose, and then there's a filter that's 3-stage that can purify any fresh water source. The filter came out the same technology that was in the space station. It's a nano alumina labyrinth filter with an activated charcoal element to it as well. Kind of adapting a little bit of what was out of the camping world, the backpacking world. I've done a lot of backpacking and stuff, and mixing, the best of many technologies. I found the pump from a friend of mine's high school class. He's doing a aquaponics garden in this little aquarium. And I was like, where did you get this pump? I've never seen such a miniature pump. And so we combine, various technologies, and that's a lot of the stuff that we do now is not so much like full on invention. It's combining the latest technologies in a new way. So it's kind of like ad hoc inventing. Again, if you're on the tour, you can come see our tiny house, which is basically a solar powered off-grid home on wheels. It's about twice the weight of a equivalent travel trailer camper. Weighs about 13,000 pounds, but it's got far better insulation, far more comfort and livability. Like it's almost soundproof in there. It's spacious. These are renders, but it looks almost identical to that. And then, there's a big solar battery system. There is propane here. You just can't always live on the sun year round, unless maybe in Africa where you don't have huge temperature fluctuations. And one of the big hits for us is heating in the solar era, and trying to be a solar heated home in Ohio in this thing called December. It gets a little unrealistic. And so you got to keep it real. And oftentimes, if you're off grid, the best way to do that is a 20-pound tank of propane. This thing will burn if you're living in there, like set to like 72 comfort style, it'll burn a full 20-pound pig tank every week or so. And that's a really efficient tiny house. You know, it's the other way to do that is a mini split, which I kind of regret that we didn't do. Mini splits, again, back to the heat pump. Mini splits are shockingly efficient, and they're getting more and more so. And I think we could almost get through the winter with a mini split, and then on those really gray days, 4 days of clouds or something, you would have to have that propane for backup. So.
Does it have the wireless toilet in it?
Yeah, it has a cool, waste is a whole nother big one. I've been involved in solar for 25 years, and that was a gateway for all kinds of things related to the whole green technology, clean technology. Waste is something I've spent way too much of my time and career involved in. I'm I'm a little jaded in the world of waste. Why? Well, I think plastic is kind of next to impossible as just in general. It's just a really difficult thing. Polyethylene is amazing, but almost every other resin type is a complete chafe. And not to get too off on waste, but human waste. Woohoo! The Human Manure Handbook. That's a great one. You got to read that one if you're a hippie. Yeah, Human Manure Handbook. This guy talks about how much value human waste has, particularly number 2. And that like people in China have been using it for centuries to grow their food and whatnot. And I kind of agree, right?
It's safe. In the cities, they recycle.
Yeah. And so I put in a composting toilet on the tiny house. It's kind of cool. I think it's called Separate, and maybe a French company makes it. When you're looking at the top of the toilet, it kind of looks like a standard toilet. But there's the front of it is separated from the back. And I think you know why. Although for men it's a little different or weird, but the front has like a funnel that goes down, and then the back has like a cover that's completely covered. And that, not until you put your weight on the seat does that cover open and reveals a bucket down there. And then the bucket is actually unlike most composting toilets that you may be familiar with, where you're throwing sawdust in there and trying to make this stuff happen. You actually just do your business in the bucket, and it's wrapped with a compostable plastic bag, if there is such a thing. Then after like a week or two, you take the bucket out of the whole system, and you go out to your dedicated compost and grab that plastic bag and dump it, reline the plastic bag and put it back in. There's a vent fan that blows air across this thing 24/7. So you never get the smell of whatever's in the bucket. And the bucket is way, way, way less stinky because you haven't added the liquid. So again, if you ever learn anything today, it's you got to keep them separated. Who knew we were going to be engineering through all this stuff? Geez, little bodily fluids. But keep it. Anaerobic bacteria is what really stinks. And anaerobic means it's underwater, under fluid. So if you keep the solids kind of aerated and drying out, and you keep the urine going down a different drain, and that can be a gray water drain, not a black water drain. There's 2 things that make black water, and that is human refuse, solids, and meat, raw meat. So if you're a vegetarian and you have a composting toilet, you're not making any black water. It's kind of interesting. It's like meat fats, meat oils and stuff. They get all nasty and rancid, similar to our material. So in our tiny house, we don't really let people do meat in there. We're like, yeah, do the meat outside. Just don't bring it in the house, because it's set up on a gray water system basically, and the only black water is that bucket, or the only black contaminant.
So the gray water is recycled.
Yeah, it's got a wastewater garden, So the gray water goes through a little separating vessel and then into a kind of a bed of lava rocks, kind of a labyrinth. And in there is a bunch of plants that are really interested in the nutrients that come from the soaps and the urine and, you know, any other kind of wash that's going on in the. And then we ask people in the tiny to use biodegradable soaps, right? Like the pure Castile soap, like Dr. Bronner's or whatever, when they're showering. And that, you know, not many people argue with that. Maybe the clientele are a little unique down there. But you guys would never know because you're not coming out of your classroom. A couple other ideas. I'm really manipulative today. No, you guys are a way better class than the last couple. Like just COVID made this really hard, and it felt like for a year or two there that like nothing was real, and I would get way more information out of staring at my screen than I would in real life. Hopefully that's changing a little bit, and you're getting out and going to see live shows and, you know, doing fun real things. Different ideas that I just wanted to, I'm happy to share with you guys. You know, there's just so much potential where solar will integrate into our future lives. It's here to stay. You know, that wasn't obvious 25 years ago, and I was laughed at a lot more than I'm being laughed at today 25 years ago. And that was before people like Elon Musk were out there recognizing the value of solar and energy efficiency. And he's kind of a unicorn in the space that's kind of validated the whole conversation. Obviously, it's not just him. There's a million other pieces of momentum moving towards solar. Solar is basically more affordable than any other form of electricity, unless you're like in a really windy place, and then wind is. And that's, again, that's a trend that isn't going away, and that's only going to get more and more strong. You know, I think another big piece of the solar energy era is how much are we really building resilience? Most solar systems are not battery based, meaning if the grid goes down, they go down. And so there's some real threats to that in that it doesn't really hit that degree of resilience or autonomy that solar was largely developed for. Solar electric was developed for NASA, for the space station, and dispatched up into space. The ISS was dispatched in the 1980s. So it's been up there for a long time, running on solar alone, back when it was super duper expensive. If you ever look at the like price curve of solar, there's an interesting graph where the price of solar is here, and it's like 1980, you know, and then 1990, 2000, 2010, 2000, you know, 20. And basically, price of solar is like nothing compared to what it was. And then on the other line is like the number of installs, and you see like nothing. Oh, it's starting to happen, and then it's just like logarithmic, like it's going to be off the chart. You remember An Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore, and he had to get out his scissor lift to kind of show you what was happening with carbon emissions or something. That's happening with the solar energy industry. And it's actually, America is a bit of a laggard in the solar energy space. We're a weird country where capitalism is king and leadership is not great in terms of their interest in doing things that aren't just purely capitalistic or entrenched with, you name it, a lot of powers that be. So Europe, South America, Middle East, I mean, solar is growing so much faster in other places than it is in the States, because we don't really have leadership that incentivizes or looks at. We're still incentivizing fossil fuels on a level of, you know, trillions of dollars a year. And I think all the solar energy industry would request is like, if we could just level the playing field and stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, whether that's coal, natural gas, or oil, or even nuclear. And if we could just level the playing field and sort of peel out all the incentives for everyone and let it be even, I think you would see solar would be extremely competitive. It's very competitive now. The average payback for a solar system on a residential situation would be about 10 years now, which is generally permissible for most households. Most businesses, it's going to be a lot shorter because you're getting kind of the bang for buck. Something like 5 years, depending on where you are and what the state-based incentives are. A lot of businesses require a 3-year payback for their capital expenditures. Meaning if you're asking me to give you $1 million, I need it back in 3 years in savings or some sort of financial return. So, but solar's, going crazy by pretty much any corporation you can think of is putting it up as readily as possible. And, the interesting tie-in is that you got to make things more efficient before you do your solar work, because any dollar that you spend on efficiency will save you, $10 or whatever on the cost of your solar array.
What's your solar? Are you doing solar air conditioning now?
No, we aren't. We are doing a lot more with larger and larger power banks. Air conditioning is one of the biggest energy loads out there, and really, yeah, that's the stuff that I'm really interested in. We did a couple like personal comfort products in the last several years, one of which was a pretty high powered, high efficiency fan for cooling. And we've done some like heated blankets and heated seat type of stuff for the winter. It's air conditioning and space heating, are HVAC is a big difficult one. And one interesting way to approach HVAC is to look at, where does the heat or cooling need to be? And the answer is on us. Like, I need to be comfortable in a space. That doesn't mean that all of the space has to be 68 degrees. So if your chair had a heater in it and the building was 58 degrees, you might be comfortable. Your hands might get a little cold on the computer.
Yeah, they're doing that in the cars, like heated, and they have cooled seats.
Right.
So it's like, yeah.
The Rocky Mountain Institute did a really interesting project where they took a chair, an office chair. Their offices have like a 40-degree temperature swing depending on the season. And the chair has a big battery on it underneath it. And the chair's got a fan system to make sure that it takes away any sweat if you're too hot. And it has a heated system. So in the winter, when the air temperature inside the building is 55, you sit in the chair, the heater turns on. In the summer, the air temperature in the building is like 85 and the fans running to keep you dry. The Rocky Mountain Institute.
Oh yeah.
RMI.org. Amory Lovins is a hero of mine. And this guy has done more unique big picture work on the conversation of energy, and that's many of its forms, including transportation, HVAC.
So is that chair commercially available?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with it.
That would make sense.
I'd like to make it commercially available.
It's in cars, cars.
Right.
Yeah.
They did a energy retrofit on the Empire State Building that saved like 40% of the energy of the building, and it had like a 2-year payback. This is just good engineering. This kind of stuff, these opportunities just abound in American life. There's so many excess, there's so much excess, right? In general, so much waste that we can mine and take advantage of and be more efficient with. And I think that's going to be a huge part of our future, is just getting to do more with less. They've done a bunch of work with the Pentagon, DOT. But that's a phenomenal resource of real life engineering, where engineering meets policy and the commons, the public goods. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Yeah. What are you guys learning about today? I mean, not today, but in the rest of your solar power for Africa, right? There's a huge bunch of small micro solar going on in Africa. It's a really interesting study that, and I'm sure Dr. Beaucage has shared that, like, a lot of times the grid hasn't gotten to places because cell phones and micro solar are meeting the modernization needs. And what we're like little solar arrays to power a single light. Maybe 15 years ago, a little baby LED and some NiCad batteries or whatever have grown, to where you can get a big system for your whole cabin. And the system will come with a TV and a bunch of outlets and a bunch of lights, and maybe it'll come with a water pump. And then there's this thing called pay-as-you-go solar, that there's your central control in your $400 African solar system will have a monthly subscription requirement. So every month it'll kind of like shut off the lights if you don't plug in a code, and you get that code by paying your bill. So if you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you're making $5 a day, it's hard to pay $400 for a solar system for your cabin. But you could pay $10 a month or $20 a month. And you do that on these pay-as-you-go or solar as a service subscriptions. And you'll text the money, you'll send the money to the man, they send you a code, you plug that into your control, and then you have power for the next month. And that's happening millions and millions of homes in Africa. It's really an interesting study. And that's starting to happen like on community levels where, if it's not an individual scale, then like the community will come together and put a big solar array on one building, and everyone can go there to watch the game, to charge their cell phone, to grind the corn, get some kind of whatever, like the laundry or something else done. We know that electricity is pretty darn helpful for spinny things, and boy, do we depend on it here. Show of hands, does anybody have like backup power for utility grid outages? Do you have something in mind and plan if the power goes out? Like, do you have a way to charge your cell phone? Do you have a battery? Yeah. Okay, maybe 10%. What about in terms of water? If you can't get clean water out of the tap, do you have a water filter from your camping gear, your backpack gear? Nobody, anybody ish? Yeah, couple, like the Life Straw or something like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Palestine.
Right.
Gaza Strip, so the only way they have to communicate now is with solar panel. I guess they must have satellite phones or something too.
Or maybe the cell towers are working.
Yeah. No, nothing's working.
Yeah.
There's no power. Well, the cell towers are solar, I guess. But I'm not sure the whole system probably shuts down, but the water, right? Is a thing.
Yeah.
Filtered water, like your water filter from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You become a popular person.
Yeah.
I drinking sewage water.
Love to figure out how to get more over there. We're trying to, we have some cool nonprofits that we engage with, but that's been a really tough situation because aid has been shunned from.
Yeah, well, we have to already. This is closed.
Yeah, it's closed. It sounds like Israel's gonna.
Like so political, like you get shot by someone if you try to help people out there.
Yeah, it's intense, man.
It's like crazy.
Super intense.
Definitely is a need for it.
Yeah.
Someone or another is going to shoot it.
Yeah. Yeah, we have it pretty good here in the States, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the services we get, we take for granted. Boy, is there a lot that goes into clean water or power or food production or waste management, but you guys know how to handle that now. The waste management thing, no problem.
Just keep it separate.
You got to keep them separated. So, and then what else are you guys learning about in terms of African in the context of African engineering, barefoot engineering, if you were.
I don't know.
Anybody?
Actually, the last couple of weeks we've been looking at cold power because just to see. We went down to the Miami Fort plant.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty scary.
Pretty scary.
It is. This is
Yeah.
the place to go. Worth going to.
Yeah.
But anyway, they're shutting down. They shut down all the coal plants in this area. So there aren't going to be any in 2 years. So it's all gone to natural gas.
Natural gas.
With a little bit of solar.
You guys familiar with the term permaculture? A show of hands or shake of heads, permaculture. You know what that is? Nobody's permaculture. All right. That's something that was developed in Australia, and it's kind of like the word, how do we make a permanent agricultural system that uses nature as much as possible to make more of itself. And it's a set of design principles that you apply to land that allows you to grow food and grow wildlife or domesticated animals in an abundant fashion that involves like building soil, cleaning the water, and keeping in line with energy flows. But permaculture is kind of taking off in some places in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a big deal in Israel. And it's an important part of the equation. Basically, how do we improve the landscape so that it can have its own, thriving ecosystem and supply the human with fruits and vegetables, and clean water or whatever. And again, it's essentially, kind of engineering a landscape so that it works for you. And the point is that you would put in a lot of time and effort over the first 5 or 10 years of owning a piece of property, and then it'll return over the long haul in the form of apples and nuts from the trees and clean water and abundant thick soil that you could grow anything in. And it's a lot of like closing the loop, like we talked about with the humanure, or using solar to charge your batteries and not having to import a bunch of fossil fuels or ice or, things from Walmart onto your property that you have to buy every week or every month in order to sustain life. So it's off-grid living in its finest, permaculture. And if you're into that kind of thing, there is some coursework happening over at DAP around permaculture by a professor named Braden Trouth, who's here. And he started like the Cincinnati Permaculture Guild. And there's a bunch of farms in the region that are practicing.
Yeah, I ran into him with the biochar people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we were doing some stuff with biochar.
That's a really interesting thing. Yeah.
It's part of the permaculture somehow.
Sure. Yeah. Talk about the cycle, Yeah. Biochar is like a perfectly sealed form of carbon that lasts forever. And, it's like it gets carbon out of the atmosphere and into the soil where plants can access it. And charcoal does an incredible job storing nutrients and moisture. There's this terra paretta soils that we found in the Amazon where they had been banking charcoal in their soil for centuries. And the soil in the area was like crazy abundant, just huge amounts of production. And it wasn't until more recently that they discovered it's the charcoal that's in their soil that really gave it that advantage. And so people are trying to put biochar into their soils to replicate and emulate that, which it works pretty much anywhere in the world, and basically seals carbon up and makes it available. Yeah, well, good stuff, guys. Class is 5 minutes. Is it an hour class?
Yeah.
I got nothing.
There's no questions.
Sure.
So we've had a lot of guest speakers come in talking about the grid and how with the increase in energy usage in the future that the grid's not gonna be able to handle the load that's coming, but I thought you brought up a really interesting point when you talked about the Empire State Building and how that company made them more efficient. So do you think that there should be more emphasis on upgrading the grid to help the load or making things that are already in place on the grid more efficient and therefore consuming less energy?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And this guy at RMI, he coined a term called negawatts. There, megawatts is like how we talk about big volumes of energy. Generally, gigawatts are like the only things that power plants can create. Is a gigawatt, like on a coal-fired facility, and that might be 1,000 megawatts. But negawatts is the idea of efficiency. How do we figure out how to get more things off of the grid or using 50% less power? It's not hard to do. The technology is there, and it's just having the intelligence to kind of swap out old tired appliances. So I think the answer is both. Unfortunately, that's the answer a lot of times, and it's complicated and expensive. But energy efficiency is actually kind of the lowest hanging fruit. And so for most businesses and even homes, if the homeowner's active in that, and really willing to give it a good listen and give their house a good weatherization and energy efficiency upgrade, there's where your best savings are going to be as the person who's paying the bills, as the corporation or the homeowners. So absolutely, energy efficiency is going to be a huge part of our future. And then, and then the smart grid, which is a big nebulous word that encompasses everything. Essentially, the grid's going to have to get more intelligent to be able to manage, tons of electric vehicles getting plugged in at the same time that the clouds showed up and the solar array is no longer producing. And the wind is blowing like crazy up in Lake Erie, and we got to get power from there down here. So we're going to have to move power around much more efficiently, and especially in the world of what's called distributed generation, meaning that a lot of people will be making their own electricity. Like all of us can be our own power company from our rooftop, and so which I'm a big believer of. And the utilities are often a little jaded or a little against letting people do that for obvious reasons. It hurts their bottom line. And they're saying it destabilizes the grid on some conversations, which generally, in fact, is opposite. If you have a bunch of people making their own power, it stabilizes the grid. But the grid does need to be more intelligent to manage all these different sources.
Needs storage.
And then the biggest part of the equation is storage, which is actually happening a lot. And what's interesting is
turning the old coal plants into battery facilities.
Is that right?
Has the wires in California. But they talk to the people here about it, and they're like, "Well, we're thinking about it." So it's like, it's getting to be late thinking when it's going to shut down next year. They already shut down like Zimmer. It's sitting there. It's got all the wires, and all I need is to get the batteries.
That's a lot of battery. But in California, where utility rates are about 4 times they are here, we spend about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and I think on average in California it's like 30 cents. So if you have the economics at play, economics drives so much of this stuff. But I was going to say that the electric vehicle is an interesting part of the equation, that you can have your electric vehicle sitting idle at home, plugged into the grid, and the batteries are full, and the grid really needs power. And you could sell electricity back to the utility companies to help wipe out your power bill. Now you're using your electric vehicle's battery, similar to like using your laptop battery. Like it does tire it out. It has a certain amount of cycles that are going to wear itself out. So a lot of manufacturers are like, no, we're not going to let you touch our battery because we want to put miles on those batteries, not give the utility power. But vehicle to grid is happening. It's a little late, like it should have happened a long time ago, but it's starting to happen. Ford, actually, the Ford
Also,
Lightning.
like backup power, I mean, when the power goes out, you got the car parked there, it's got more than enough to power your house for 3 days.
There you go.
I mean, it's like, why not?
So there's your resilience as well.
Yeah.
So, exactly. That's what I've been like
But we had the
holding out
solar
for.
installers come in and they never even heard of that. They
Really?
never even heard of like using the car.
Vehicle to grid.
Yeah,
Ah,
it's like,
yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a perfect combination because you nailed it. Storage is a huge part of the equation. Well, good stuff. Looks like,
so the other questions? Comments?
thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you all. If you want to contact me, you're welcome to. I'm Patrick at gosun.co. Patrick@gosun.co.
It's people like co-op down there.
Yeah, we used to do a ton of co-ops. We don't do them as much anymore. Great to meet you all. Yeah, it's exhausting when you do it, you know, but man, is it fun. We did about 20 co-ops over the course of the last couple of years. And just in the last like 2 years, we kind of clicked. Yeah, Eric Easter. Yeah, Eric and his brother Carl worked for in different capacities over the course of a couple of years, and I have stayed in contact with him. I haven't talked to him in a little bit. Eric's up in Michigan.
Yeah.
And I think he's working on like his PhD now. I think so. I haven't talked to him in like a year.
Yeah, he did.
Right, yeah. And engineering.
Yeah, it was like.
Yeah. And I think Paul was doing something similar at OSU, but I can't remember. He's probably getting close to graduating.
Yeah, I know that. Is that worthwhile?
Something like that was great because they were such high performers, and like I got to work with them for like 2 or 3 summers.
Yeah.
And so those were perfect.
Yeah.
Whereas
Brothers, they're twins, you know. I don't know.
Oh, cool.
Right.
Yeah.
They're same X, you know. I don't know.
yeah,
They might be. They have some vibe.
right.
Because they're doing some.
And then unless they become like really bad, then we can
Mhm.
They still work for you.
Mhm.
because
They also though have, let's say, they're doing a lot of different things, like the lifeguards.
like terrible economics. I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
do you think yours will be almost done? Do you think
It's
that
pretty
will
hard
be
to tell.
better?
yeah, right. You don't really know until you work with them for 3 months or something too. Yeah. So this is like a,
No, I'm sorry about the tour.
Oh, no
I mean,
problem.
I put it out, I thought I had like 2 or 3 people, at least said yes, and when I did this coal plant thing, and on the day of it, like 10 people showed.
yeah,
So,
Cool.
yeah, so it was like, wow.
Figured
all right,
that,
maybe
you
that's
know,
gonna
yeah.
happen.
No worries, yeah.
Yeah.
You're welcome to, you know, I'm heading that way. Um,
Just do like the different grades. The different,
I
like,
took the advice out.
the only difference is like the grade of the lead, right?
Somebody from home.
Yeah. Because some of the people are 2 people.
Yeah,
Well, that's still recording.
I think I turned it off, but I don't know. The Zoom call.
Yeah.
I usually just do a total shutdown.